Salve, people of the earth. As you can tell, I have a bit of a thing here. Try not to look at it too much because it looks disgusting. But the point is that today we're going to be talking about education. I think it's time that we really tell you why the Alpha-Allotropy is so important. Now, the Alpha-Allotropy is an idea from the Gemtocracy Manifesto that I think would benefit a lot of people, because currently the system is very much based on a almost production basis, like military timing, you know, chain of command, things like that. They want you to learn those things. But what I've noticed that a lot of students, they get into debt, and a lot of students, they are overstimulated because they need to work as well at the same time. So like they have a lot of things, they don't have a social life, and their mental health can decrease rapidly. And I think that's something that's not been accounted for in the calculation for what education should be, because it's so long ago since we really did a big rehash. Now, there have been new attempts at making new schools, but these attempts were very mild. And I think it's time that we look at it from the perspective of why the government should do the same thing. You know, completely reform schools. And I'm talking about this on an international basis, because I have many students all over the world. I mentor them with things like biology, chemistry, English, history, geography. But I've noticed a lot of problems with the loads that they have to work with. Because they get home from school, and then their parents want them to do something, and then they have to do their homework, and then they have to eat, and then they have to do more homework, and then they're too tired to do anything else, and they can barely talk to people, and then they just go to sleep. Now, I know that this is something very similar to what a lot of people have when they work. But that's also not something that Gemtocracy would stand for. We don't really believe in this like work to live to work. We don't believe in the live to work rule. We believe that working is an important part of living, but for us it's more about what kind of work you do. And I feel like the work that's being done right now isn't really that valuable in that sense. In schools at least, because a lot of schools, they just want people to show what they can do, but it's so stupid because it keeps happening. Like they want you to and this is the thing, most of my students, I found many methods which work better than what most schools do. I think one of the most important, if not the most important things that I do differently is I try to add music and videos and animations, and I try to give a real concept of how things are in documentaries, you know, but also playing games. And it sounds really stupid maybe, but these are the things that help people learn the most, because these are experiences, right? They're not just something that they have to push into their brain. These are experiences, and occasionally telling them a little fact actually helps a lot too. It does wonders. But just to remind people, if you haven't read the Democratic Manifesto, I'll give you a short. I have it on my phone just to make sure I don't misspeak. A short version of what the reform education is. Now it's called the Alpha-Allotropy, which is basically alpha means the first, and allotropy is talking about the chemical property of being in one state or more, but still being the same thing. We're basically saying, like, it doesn't matter if you're a person, you still have your own unique abilities and your own unique styles. And it starts from a very young age. Okay, so the Alpha-Allotropy will start on focusing on it will focus on starting education. And in the first 6 years of their lives, children must be taught the basis by their guardians. At age 6, the children will enter the academy. The classes of an academy must include math, history, biology, farming, chemistry, astronomy, religion, theology, paranormal, language, art, sports, computer, engineering, music, and cooking. And the first few years are basically just them testing and then developing themselves up until they are about 16. where they can develop themselves even more. But they can choose what they do, basically. They can pick their own subjects. And I want more breaks in between things. I don't want people to just, and I want more healthy environments as well. And I don't want there to be a limit on how much you can go to the bathroom, because that's also stupid. I want children to be able to eat in specific designated areas whenever they want. If they have food that's been given to them by their parents, of course, I think that's important. I think it's important that no one goes like hungry or whatever. Of course, there's a certain sort of self-control that people need to learn, but I think that's something that needs to be evaluated per person, per situation. But like even beyond starting education, one thing, there's a big problem that we have with intelligence is very much valued, and I take this from someone who's worked in education, that they put too much value actually on it. Most jobs nowadays, in the Netherlands especially, that are within the lower ranks, actually let you make more money, because there's less people for it now, because they try to increase the amount of intelligent people. They really promoted that. But by going for the higher educations, we're missing out on the lower educations of people that we still need. And that's a big problem now, and there's a gap in the market. And it doesn't really help that robots are slowly starting to take over, machinery is starting to take over. It means that people are less likely to feel secure, and then combining that with the fact that Corona took a huge hit on the economy, and now people aren't willing to risk it, and for a low income, because companies can't pay that much anymore, because they would go out of business more quickly. And I'm talking especially about the smaller companies, and the bigger companies are just greedy, and they do it on an international basis, so they probably don't even look at the global politics of anything. And that's something that I think Gemtocracy would do. If we have a Gemtocratic empire, I think it's important that we look at every region as its own subset of region. So like, we can't do one ruling for everything without first accounting for what it's going to do to every single part of it. So we need to really make sure that it's beneficial for everyone. But the point that I'm trying to make is that it seems as if there's this big gap between the value of labor and the value of intelligence. But I think both have their own value, because it's not like one has more or less, it's two different kinds of values. And when you think about it, value is rather subjective. It's the Heidrich model, like the model of Austrian economics. But basically, what I'm trying to say is that there's no incentive anymore for people to take on a lower education, and the people that can or should take a lower education, so to speak, they don't feel like they want to do that, because they see all these other people that are getting rich on the internet, for example. The amount of influencers has risen dramatically, but the amount of successful ones is still very scarce. I mean, it looks like there's a lot of successful influencers, but when you think about it, how many do you actually know? How many influencers do you know? And then think about how many people there are on this earth, and then think about how many people are there in developed societies that have a lot of internet, that are in that range of the lower education works. It's like, they call it lower education, but really, is it really lower education? I mean, if you don't know how to do plumbing, that could be a big issue for you. But this is the problem with the educational system. And then giving the homework thing is also a problem, because they give homework to children, which I don't get it at all, actually. Why not just be at school more at that point? But that's something I also don't want. I think it's just that we need to decrease the workload so it actually works. You need to adapt to what people can take, and many people, they get through school because they're just so tired of it, and they get through university, they get their diploma, and then a few years later forget everything again. That's just what mostly happens, because they just can't retain it, because it's too much, and it doesn't make sense to retain some of the things. You're not gonna retain even like the quadratic formula, right? Are you gonna retain that forever? Why? When are you gonna use that? Unless it's in your job. And that's the point that I'm trying to make. You create an education system that's saying, okay, advanced math, advanced knowledge is the way to go. But then you expect them to work in like electricity? No, that's not gonna happen. People are not gonna buy that. And I have a lot of hatred for communists, but there's one thing that they are right about, which is that in capitalism there's one flaw which is very prominent, which is that wealth doesn't really grow for within the wages that often. But the problem is also that is when there's an economic downturn, and if you then have grown wages, that's going to collapse the economy, and suddenly the rich become really poor, the poor become really rich. And you might say, okay, well, what's the problem with that? Well, the problem with that is that still the rich people are going to be the ones in charge of the companies, and they are now poor. So it's like, it just reverts, either reverts back, or it just becomes complete chaos. And we saw this happen before in things like Cuba and in Vietnam, right after the USA pulled out. So it's very important that we take these things into account. So I think it's time for a big educational reform according to Gemtocratic ways, and I'm personally thinking, you know, we should also try to decrease the workload for students. Things have changed over time, and we can no longer base education on productivity. We must now base it on passion, because passion gets more done than force ever will. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Share this with everyone you know, and I hope you guys have a good day. All hail to the rebel.